Chapter 24 of Thou Art the Man. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Thou Art the Man by Mary Elizabeth Braddon. Chapter 24. The Vicar of St. Jude's. Yes, the vicar was at home. Sarah ushered Lady Penrith and Mr. Coverdale into the drawing-room and went to fetch her master, who kept them waiting some minutes before he came. A pallid, miserable creature when he did appear, a man with careworn face and bent shoulders, and whose furtive glances, which the parish priest had seen in many faces, whose meaning he knew all too well. He knew when he saw those shifty, down-looking eyes that he had had to deal with a difficult subject. He had never been able to do much good with any man who had that kind of look. He went straight to the object of their visit, after briefly introducing himself. "Lady Penrith is very anxious to see the invalid gentleman in your care," he said. "I hope you will make no difficulty about the matter." "I regret that it is out of my power to gratify her ladyship's wish. The gentleman left me in the custody of a friend early this morning." "Left you? Left this house after 10 years of imprisonment?" cried Sibyl. "I don't believe it." "That remark is hardly civil on your ladyship's part. You have no right to use the word imprisonment in relation to a sufferer who was entrusted for his own comfort and safety to my care, nor have you any right to doubt my assertion." The words were firm, but the voice was tremulous, and the manner was as bad as it could be. "How and why was this inmate of the vicarage removed, Mr. Carpew?" asked Coverdale. "I really cannot gratify your curiosity so far as to say why he was removed. That is the business of the friend who removed him. All I can tell you is how he left this house, in a fly, ordered from Ardliston. My responsibility ceased from the moment he crossed my threshold." "Your responsibility before God will never cease," exclaimed Sibyl passionately. "You have played a sordid and wicked part. You have lent yourself to the scheme of a villain. The friend you talk of, the friend, oh, what a friend he is Hubert Urquhart, who wove a web of treachery round Brandon Mountford's life." "Lady Penrith, pray be calm," pleaded Coverdale. I cannot be calm when I see to what a cruel plot this man has lent himself. But I don't believe his victim has been removed. He is still under this roof, and we are not to be put off with lies." "Lady Penrith, you seem to take pleasure in insulting me. Perhaps you would like to see the empty rooms. They are very untidy, but their emptiness may remove your doubts." "Yes, let me see the rooms. His prison of all these years." The vicar took no further notice of the obnoxious word, but quietly led the way from the drawing-room to the long, dark passage, which went between the dining-room and the kitchen to the east end of the vicarage, and there ended in an ascent of 3 steps and a baize-covered door. The vicar opened this door and ushered his visitors into an empty room, a sitting-room sparsely furnished, like the rest of the house, but by no means a bad room, light enough and airy enough, with a French window opening into the walled garden, of which Gertrude Carpew had spoken. a door opened into an adjoining bedroom where the iron bedstead and shabby furniture were about on a level with the accommodation of a third-rate lodging at a popular watering place. A charwoman was busy cleaning up litter and sweeping out corners. There were a few books on a chiffonier and a pile of old newspapers on a side table. Sibyl took up the books one after another and examined them. They all belonged to the vicar, and most of them had his name written in them. Shakespeare, Macaulay, Byron, Thackeray, Pope, Milton. The Milton, the Pope, and the Macaulay were college prizes, but the calf bindings were shabby with much usage. "There are 2 more rooms above, if you would like to see them," said the vicar. "Yes, I should like to see them," answered Sibyl curtly. "They are quite empty. They have never been furnished, but if it gratifies you—" A shrug of the bent shoulders finished the sentence, and Mr. Carpew led the way by a narrow, essentially modern staircase to the floor above, which was as blank and bare as he had asserted. "He is gone, you see," he said. "How do we know that you have not hidden him in some other part of your house?" "You are at liberty to examine my house from cellar to garret." "No, no," interposed Coverdale. "We have no wish to doubt your word, vicar. I have not, nor am I sure has Lady Penrith, although she spoke hastily just now in her disappointment. You must admit that it is a strange and perplexing fact, after inhabiting this house for 10 years. "Who says he was here that long?" exclaimed Mr. Carpew. "I say so," answered Sibyl resolutely. "I say that he was brought to this house during the storm that wrecked the Mary Jane fishing smack, the morning after my foster sister's murder. He was brought here by your old pupil, Herbert Urquhart, and he has been spirited away by the same man to prevent my seeing him. He has been robbed of liberty, perhaps of reason, by that man for his own ends. My dear Lady Penrith, consider how wild and improbable these charges are. Answer me one question. Did Mr. Urquhart bring you your lodger, or did he not?" "I cannot answer any such question. Your ladyship must understand that there are many cases in which the friends of an afflicted person desires the utmost secrecy." "Mr. Carpew, are you a clergyman of the Church of England, or the keeper of a lunatic asylum?" demanded John Coverdale with a severity which shook the vicar's shattered nerves. "If the gentleman whom you kept shut up in these rooms was out of his mind, you were guilty of a breach of the law in keeping him here, and the fact ought to be brought before your bishop." "You are in a great hurry to misjudge one of your own cloth, Mr. Coverdale. A man may be helpless and afflicted without being a lunatic. The person who occupied these rooms was not a lunatic, but he was in more need of care and privacy than many lunatics." "He was an epileptic patient," said Sibyl, white to the lips with anger. "A patient for whom open air and movement, change of climate and scene were essential. A man who should have been roaming the sea in a yacht, or wandering amidst wild, beautiful scenes, free and unharassed. To keep him in this squalid hole," looking at the square, shabby parlour with one eye accustomed to the lofty spaciousness of Killander Castle and Ellerslie House, "to keep him in such rooms as these, in that dreary, sunless garden, was to murder body and soul. And you, sir, are guilty of murder. You, who call yourself a clergyman of the Church of England. But your bishop shall know of your infamous conduct, you shall be punished." "Dear Lady Penrith, for God's sake be calm," remonstrated Coverdale, strongly moved by her passionate outburst. She flung herself sobbing upon his shoulder, instinctively clinging to him to save herself from falling to the ground. He could feel the stormy beating of her heart as his arm supported her, an arm held as King Arthur might have held his in a similar crisis. Never before had this woman, his ideal among all women, been so near his heart. So near, and yet worlds away. Alas, how fondly she must have loved that unhappy man. How much that old story meant in her life. "Pray be calm," he repeated. "We have no right to jump at conclusions. After all, you may be mistaken as to the person who occupied these rooms. I have no doubt," with a propitiatory glance at the vicar, "Mr. Carpew will be good enough to tell us the name of his charge, and where he has gone, and with whom. And then you will be satisfied, and at ease again. I decline to tell you anything or to answer any question put to me by you, Mr. Coverdale. I have been attacked in the most outrageous manner in my own house. This is a free country, and I have done nothing in violation of the law. This wretched living was given to me by the late Earl, so I suppose I must endure any amount of contumely from Lady Penrith, but I will not submit to insult from you. I understand, then, that you positively decline to satisfy Lady Penrith's doubts by giving her the fullest information in your power about the person so lately under your care?" asked Coverdale. "I most distinctly refuse to be interrogated about my private and domestic life, even by Lady Penrith," replied the vicar doggedly. "In that case we must take stronger measures. Come, Lady Penrith, we are only wasting time here. I wish you good day, vicar." The vicar's sullen reply was only half audible. He led the way back to the hall, and Lady Penrith returned to her carriage, attended by John Coverdale. "There can be no doubt," she said as they drove off. "If I had doubted before, I am certain of the fact now. They have smuggled him away between them, to some still more wretched hiding place. Hubert Urquhart and that man—" "Stop!" cried Mr. Coverdale to the coachman. "There is someone running after the carriage. A young lady. She came out of that field." The horses were pulled up about 100 yards behind the field gate, and Gertrude Carpew ran to the carriage door. "I have been watching for you ever so long, Lady Penrith," she said. "I suppose it's awfully wicked for a girl to hate her father, but I can't help hating mine for the cruel trick he has played upon you after what happened yesterday afternoon. He swore it was all arranged before you came to the vicarage, that it was settled for the poor gentleman to leave us. But if it was, Ma knew nothing about it." "My dear Miss Carpew, pray tell me exactly, as clearly as you can, all that happened since I saw you," Lady Penrith said eagerly, and then, turning to Coverdale, she added, "This young lady is the vicar's daughter, and she sympathises with me in the kindest way." "Oh, who could help sympathising with you? Poor Ma was crying all the evening. She and Pa had a long talk, and I know they had high words, for Pa was horribly cross to all of us at supper, and directly after supper he walked out of the house." "Does he often go out so late as that?" asked Mr. Coverdale. "Not once in a blue moon. It was past 10 and dark as pitch, and it was midnight before he came home. I heard him let himself in with his latchkey, for I was too miserable to go to sleep easily, and I was awake very early in the morning, and I heard a good deal of bustle and moving about downstairs. I lay listening, half awake and half asleep, and then, not long after the clock on the stairs struck 7, I heard a carriage drive to the door, and I got up and looked out the window, and I could just see father and another man huddling someone wrapped in a cloak into a fly. Could you see what the other man was like? Tall and slight, and that was all I could make out. They were very quick. Father and the stranger both got into the fly, and it drove off directly they were in. When I came down to breakfast, Mother was looking awfully miserable. But she wouldn't tell me anything. She's too completely under Father's thumb to trust any of us. We'd finished breakfast before Father came home in the fly, alone. Did he not say anything as to where he had been? Not a word. He was crustier than usual, and sent us all out of the room before he began breakfast. As a rule, he takes very little breakfast, and then wonders at us for being able to eat so early in the day. I am so sorry you should be disappointed, Lady Penrith, but perhaps, after all, the gentleman who left us this morning isn't the person you think. I am more than ever convinced that he is that person, answered Sibyl. You are a kind, true-hearted girl, Miss Carpew, and I rely on you to help me with any further information you may be able to obtain, any circumstance that may give a clue to the place where my poor friend has been taken. I promise that your kindness to me shall do no injury to your father. Whatever may happen, he shall be protected for your sake, so far as I can protect him. The chief mover in this cruel business is another person. I shall not rest till he is punished. Ah, but I'm afraid if Father has done wrong in the matter, that it must all come out sooner or later, and we shall all be disgraced, said Gertrude despondently. But whatever is going to happen to us, I'll do all I can to find out where they have taken that poor gentleman. I thank you with all my heart. Be assured you shall be compensated for any trouble your kindness may cause. Sibyl and the parson's daughter clasped hands as they said good-bye. The conversation between the two women had been carried on in confidential tones, inaudible to coachman and footman. Ardliston Road Station, ordered Mr. Coverdale, and the barouche continued on his way, while Gertrude started on a circuitous journey through a field and across a common, so as to arrive at the vicarage from an opposite direction to that in which Lady Penrith's carriage had gone. I may as well make some inquiries at the station before we can go back to the castle, if you've no objection, said Mr. Coverdale, explaining the order he had just given to the coachman. It may make us a little later in returning. What does that matter? Let us stay out all day, if there is anything to be done, answered Sibyl, and then lapsed into silence, exhausted by the scene at the vicarage, and absorbed in gloomy thought. She did not speak till they were at the station, which was nearer St. Jude's than it was to Ardliston. Here Mr. Coverdale left the carriage for nearly a quarter of an hour. I have seen the station master and the two porters, he told Sibyl when he came back. There seems no doubt that the two men went to Keswick. The one who appeared to be an invalid was so wrapped up in an Inverness cloak and large white muffler that it was not easy to distinguish his features. The men only saw that he looked white and haggard. The other man wore a shooting cap pulled down upon his forehead, a cap with a peak, and he, too, had the lower part of his face muffled in a scarf. But this circumstance attracted no attention, as the morning was raw and cold. I asked the station master to describe the man in charge of the invalid, his figure and carriage, if not his face, and he said he was about the height and figure of Lord Penrith, and reminded him of his lordship. "Hubert Urquhart," exclaimed Sibyl. "That is conclusive. Now, Mr. Coverdale, what are we to do? Go on to Keswick, I say, by the first train that will take us? My dear Lady Penrith, that would be a wild proceeding. Keswick is a large place, and for you to be seen there, going from pillar to post, and then to absent yourself from home without explanation to Lord Penrith. I can send a message by the coachman. I can explain afterwards. No, it would be a waste of time and trouble for you to attempt to trace these men. I will follow up the clue and see what can be done, and if I make any discovery before evening I can telegraph you, and you can come to Keswick with your maid and put up at a hotel for a day or two." "Yes, that would do. I should be near. But even that would be a rather wild thing to do. If you could make up your mind to trust this business entirely to me—" "I do trust you. I know how much better you are able to help me in this matter than I am able to help myself. But when you find him, if he should be very ill and broken, I should like to be near at hand. I might be of some use then." "In that case, I promise to summon you without an hour's delay." "And will you go to Keswick and give yourself up to the search?" "With all my might. Have I not promised to devote myself to your service? I shall think of nothing else till this is done. If Penrith should inquire about me, you need only to say that I had business in Keswick, and that my return to the castle is uncertain. If you'll allow me, I'll ask your footman to see about sending me a portmanteau. I may be absent for some days." "How good you are!" "Please don't say that. Only trust me, and keep up your courage. Bear in mind that my East End experiences have made me acquainted with strange people and strange things. I am not so unequal to this task as you might suppose. I know how clever, how resolute you are. My train will not leave for half an hour, so I'd better tell your coachman to drive you home." "Mayn't I wait till you leave?" "Please don't. You have had a trying morning, and you will be better at home." He gave his instructions briefly to the footman, and then the carriage drove away, he watching till the pale, anxious face looking back at him vanished altogether from his sight. How she must have loved him, John Coverdale repeated to himself with a sigh. End of chapter 24. Chapter 25 of Thou Art the Man. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Thou Art the Man by Mary Elizabeth Braddon. Chapter 25. Cora Lee's Private Diary continued. Her ladyship's conduct becomes hourly more extraordinary. After leaving the castle early this morning with the parson, coolly declining my company, which I offered in my gushing little way on the spur of the moment, determined at any rate to embarrass her by forcing a refusal, she returns at 3 o'clock this afternoon without that saintly man. When I ask her in a casual way what she has done with him, she replies that he has gone to Keswick, and that he has his business there which may detain him for some days. "Business in Keswick?" I say, not concealing my surprise. I thought the only business in Keswick was making lead pencils and showing Southey's house. That is all I've ever heard of in connection with Keswick." "You can't be expected to know everything in the world, Cora," answered she, "least of all to know Mr. Coverdale's business." "Oh, if it is a kind of secret service, of course I needn't be ashamed of my ignorance," retorted I. "Lady Penrith is my benefactress. My easy life here, my purse filled with pocket money, all the frocks in my wardrobe, testify to that fact. But I am afraid I am beginning to hate her, and I am afraid she is beginning to hate me. Our relations are at best an armed neutrality. Who knows when war may be declared? After all, I need not exaggerate her beneficence or my obligation. The benefits she has bestowed upon me, the frocks, the lodging, the pocket money, are bagatelles for a woman of her means. If she really wanted to befriend me, how easy for her to settle the £6,000 which my father tells me has always been the portion of Lord Penrith's daughters, upon me, sole daughter of the house of Urquhart. £6,000. With her fortune she would have but to sign a cheque for the amount, and might forget the next hour that her coffers were diminished by that paltry sum. But instead of playing a really generous part, and making me independent for life, she lets her dressmaker clothe me, just as my uncle's tailor clothes his liveried servants, and she tolerates my presence in her house. Whatever chance I might have had with Mr. Coverdale, she has contrived to spoil. She must see that he admires her far too much for his peace, and if she really were that model of all the domestic graces for which she poses, she would have chilled him by quiet avoidance, instead of leading him on by making him the confidant of her sorrows, whatever those mysterious sorrows might be. In my delight at escaping from the dusty horrors of a second-rate lodging-house, I have been over-enthusiastic about my uncle's beautiful countess. These quiet women are never to be trusted. Another surprise, and a very painful one, awaited me this evening. It was just on the edge of dark. Lady Penrith had not honoured the drawing-room with her presence after coming in from her long drive, minus Coverdale. Lady Selina, after having usurped my favourite chair all the afternoon, clamoured for an early tea, and for 1 solid hour I was administering to her gormandising propensities. Released from this genteel slavery, I made my escape from the drawing-room, lest I should be called upon to hold a huge skein of that teeth-on-edge setting worsted which she calls pre-Raphaelite wool. I thought that in the almost deserted state of the house I should at least have the billiard-room to myself, and I might enjoy knocking about the balls, and deliverance from Lady Selina's society. Oh, how sick I am of her married nieces, their houses, their diamonds, their babies, their servants, with the latter of whom she is always quarrelling. She tells me the same prosy stories over and over again, and the possibility that she might be boring me to death never for one moment flashes across the great dismal swamp which she calls her mind. The lamps in the hall had not been lighted, and its stony spaciousness looked cold and grey in the gathering dusk. All the principal rooms open into this sepulchral hall, and I am often reminded of that hall in Macbeth's castle, where the murderer prowled up and down, seeing imaginary daggers, while he waited for the bell that was to tell him his prehistoric toddy was ready. I had opened the billiard-room door, and was just going to shut it again, when I heard my father's voice. My father's voice in a house which he had not entered since the Earl's marriage. What could it mean? Certainly not reconciliation. Those rasping tones came from a heart full of bitterness. Nor was there much of brotherly love in my uncle's reply. "You had better hold your tongue," he said. "You have been drinking, or you would not have dared to enter this house." Lord Penrith was standing in the open doorway of his own sitting-room, a smallish room next to the library, while my father stood in the hall. "Dare!" he echoed with an angry laugh. "Dare enter the house that was my father's a few years ago." "If it had been your own a few years ago, it would make no difference to me. It is my house now, and I mean to keep you outside it." "You treat me like a dog." "Oh, no, I don't," answered that cold-blooded monster, my uncle. "I am fond of my dogs. I treat you like what you are, Hubert Urquhart. If there's any animal as vile, I have never met with the species." "It's great to hear you talk like this, after I played your game, made the running for you, helped you to a rich wife." "You tried to win her for yourself by the very basest means the mind could invent." "Oh, come now. This is only tall talk." "You know how you imposed upon her ignorance of life, tried to persuade her that her good name was forfeited, that she had fallen so low in the world's esteem that her best chance of redemption was to become your wife." "Ah, and with the devil's own luck you struck in, caught her in a fit of hysterics, and won the stakes. There was never such a fluke. Come, Penrith, you can't frighten me away with the big words. All that highfalutin of yours has about the same effect on me as water on the proverbial duck. Hard words don't kill. Hard words won't send me off these premises without hard cash. I have asked you, my brother, and a rich man, to help me out of a difficulty. I asked you just now for a monkey. It was not much for you to give it if you had a spark of generosity. I have not one scintillation where you are concerned. I have only one feeling, abhorrence, the kind of abhorrence which includes contempt." "Nonsense. We both angled for a big fish, but you were able to bait your hook with a coronet. I wasn't, and I had to diplomatise. Come, Penrith, if you won't stand a monkey, give me your cheque for £250, and I'll wish you a civil good night. Remember, I am heir presumptive to your title, and all that goes with it. There's only your life between me and all the good things of this world. Hard lines for a man of my temper to remember that. You ought to consider the circumstances, and if I can bring myself to ask you for money, after what happened at Ellerslie 10 years ago, you shouldn't be such a churl as to refuse." "I wonder you care to show yourself in this part of the world, after what happened at Ellerslie," said my uncle. The last words were spoken slowly, as if they had a hidden meaning. My father was silent, and then Penrith went on in his heartless voice. "As for your privileges as heir presumptive, I have no doubt that you have had the market price for them." "The market price was a very bad one. Unhappily, the Jews consider your life as good as mine, or better. The difference in our ages is not worth considering, and you are supposed to take more care of your superior carcass than I take care of this poor bundle of vices. Once for all, Penrith, will you help me or will you not? Once for all, I will not. And if you don't make yourself scarce immediately, you will oblige me to ring for the servants, and get you turned out neck and crop, which will cause a scandal and make things uncomfortable for your daughter. For my daughter. Yes, I suppose you would rather like to revenge yourself on her. Well, good night, my brotherly brother. I won't make a rumpus in this abode of peace and pleasantness, this temple of conjugal love. I'll find my own way out. My father crossed the hall, opened the big oak door, and closed it quietly behind him. Penrith waited on the threshold of his room till the hall door shut, and then shut himself in his den. I don't know if he felt relieved in mind when my father was out the castle. I know I did. There was no light in the billiard room, and I had been standing just inside the door, which I held a little way open, and thus was able to hear every word that was said on the other side of the hall. Ugh, what a life! To grovel like a hound, and to be driven out of his brother's house like a hound. Surely Providence can't expect much good out of any woman who starts in the race of life handicapped with such a father as mine. After what happened at Ellerslie 10 years ago. I must get to know all about Sybil Higginson's engagement to my uncle. There are evidently tragic circumstances, something that comes nearer Lord Penrith and his wife than the murder of her ladyship's foster sister. I must make Lady Selina give me the history of her niece's marriage. She is so fond of talking that I have only to get her in the right vein, and she will tell me everything she knows. The dinner this evening was the most melancholy meal I have sat through since I came to the castle. There were only my uncle and his wife, Lady Selina, and myself. His lordship was silent and gloomy, evidently brooding over that fraternal conversation I had overheard. Her ladyship seemed lost in thought. Lady Selina prosed and twaddled for the whole party. "I am very tired, aunt, so I shall go straight to my room and leave you and Cora to amuse each other," said Lady Penrith as we 3 women left the dining room. "I can't think what you are all about to-day," Lady Selina answered pettishly. "If your cottage visiting keeps you engaged as you have been lately, I'm sure it must be too fatiguing for you. You should make Cora help you." This last remark was accentuated by a malevolent look in my direction, as if I had deliberately refused to help. "Her ladyship knows that I am always at her service," said I. Lady Penrith noticed neither her aunt's speech nor mine. She just nodded good night to us both and went upstairs, leaving me to the unspeakable dreariness of a night with Lady Selina, and no possibility of escape to the billiard room, where my uncle would be sitting alone, not a pleasant person to intrude upon in his meditative moments. There was one compensation. I had a whole evening before me in which to make Lady Selina talk about what I wanted to hear. Needless to record the insidious means by which I approached the subject. I doubt if she liked me any better than on that first night of her visit, but custom had made her familiar and confidential, and as it was natural for her to talk, she soon began to expatiate upon the folly of her niece's marriage. Sibyl might have married ever so much better, she said. A beautiful girl who was sole heiress to I am afraid to say how many thousands a year, would have had magnificent offers as soon as she appeared in the great world. Her connections on our side of the house would have admitted her at once to the most exclusive circles, if there are any exclusive circles left," interjected Lady Selina with a sigh. "She might have married a duke, but through my brother-in-law's folly — his mind was utterly unhinged, I believe, by the fate of that mysterious waif — she was hustled into a marriage with a man for whom she never cared a straw, and who was a very poor match for her." "My uncle's family is one of the oldest in the north of England," said I. "My dear young woman, old families are cheap nowadays. 60,000 a year is too much to pay for an old family and a neglected estate, encumbered as this was when my niece married. She could have married the bluest blood in England on much easier terms, if I had been allowed to chaperon her, as was intended, before that awful business at Ellerslie." "Pray tell me about the murder, Lady Selina. Have you never been told?" she exclaimed, quite oblivious of her curt replies on the first evening we spent together. "It is a most painful story, peculiarly painful to me, since a connection of our family was involved in it, and was actually accused of the murder, and locked up in a wretched hovel that used to accommodate smugglers and such people. They have pulled the place down, I am happy to say, and have built a respectable police station." And then she told me how Marie Arnold, a handsome young woman of foreign birth, had been brought up at Ellerslie almost as a daughter of the house, and how she and Sibyl Higginson had lived together like sisters, and how people had naturally supposed— At this point the spinster deemed it necessary to sink her voice to a ghastly whisper, like Lady Macbeth in the sleepwalking scene, although she and I were alone in the spacious drawing-room. "At any rate, my dear, Sir Joseph was greatly attached to this girl, who, I am glad to say, for the credit of humanity, was 5 or 6 years older than Sibyl, and therefore born some time before my sister's marriage. He never recovered from the shock of her death." "But do you really believe that Mr. Mountford, your relation, was guilty of this crime?" I asked. "My dear Miss Urquhart, I don't know what to believe. Brandon Mountford was subject to epileptic attacks. He was at the university, not in any violent degree, but enough to make him shun society. He had wandered about in Africa, where that kind of thing wouldn't matter, for some years before he appeared at Ellerslie. Everyone spoke well of him. And your niece liked him?" "Yes, Sibyl liked him. I never saw them together, but I believe she entertained a romantic regard for him. She has always shunned any allusion to him, so I have never fathomed the hidden depths of her mind on this subject. There is a great deal of reserve about Lady Penrith. As to the young man's guilt or innocence, that, I fear, must for ever remain a mystery. So much has been written of late years about the horrors of epilepsy, and how it can change an amiable being into a wild beast, that one might believe anything of an epileptic sufferer. This poor creature was found kneeling by the murdered girl, his hands dyed with her blood. He did not even deny his guilt, Miss Morison told me. Miss Morison is the housekeeper at Ellerslie. with whom doubtless the spinster aunt has held lengthy confabulations. There is no one like an old and trusted servant for telling family secrets. Since he was taken red-handed, I suppose there can be no doubt of his guilt, said I. But if he were not the murderer, who else would be likely to have committed the crime? Was anyone else ever suspected? No. Poor Brandon's guilt seemed only too obvious, and the murder was too motiveless to be the act of a sane person. The young woman had no enemies. There was no one at Ellerslie besides Brandon and your father. Then my father was there at the time of the murder? Yes, your father used to come and go like a member of the family before Sibyl's marriage. I don't know what the quarrel was about, but there was a quarrel at the period of her engagement to Penrith. Mrs. Morison hinted at an ugly scuffle between the brothers, blows, broken glass, but the particulars were never clearly known. Your father was certainly hurt, and the doctor had to be called in, but the servants were told he had had a fall. Whatever the actual circumstances may have been, there was bad blood, for Mr. Urquhart never entered Ellerslie Hall again after that fall. And when he falls like Lucifer, never to hope again, muttered I. My father told me that he and his brother had quarrelled, but he never explained the rights and wrongs of the story. And then she told me how Brandon Mountford had broken out of the lock-up at Ardliston, and was supposed to have perished in a storm at sea. Only supposed to have perished, said I. Then there is no evidence of his death? He may be alive at this hour? That's not likely. His family must have heard of him if he were living. Why should anyone hear of him? Asked I. It would be the business of his life to avoid being heard of. A man accused of murder? A man conscious of his own guilt? In all probability he would go back to Africa. I've heard that men who have once been there always want to go back. Must go back. The dark continent draws them like a lodestone. Rely on it, Lady Selina. This poor Mr. Mountford is in Africa. I have no doubt you know a great deal more about him than I do, said Lady Selina with an offended air. Young women nowadays are nothing if not positive. In my own mind I had no doubt that the man was, or had been, in Africa. Those books of African travel in Lady Penrith's room testified to so profound an interest in that uncivilized world. He had made his escape from England, and had sailed to a land where there are no detectives or magistrates' warrants or extradition treaties. But if my aunt knows Mr. Mountford to be in Africa, how to account for her intense anxiety about this wandering lunatic, for whom she inquired at all the cottages, and the fuss and driving to and fro, and the suppressed emotion of the last 10 days? All these indications point to Brandon Mountford's presence in the immediate neighbourhood, or, at any rate, to her conviction that he is near. End of chapter 25. Chapter 26 of Thou Art the Man. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Thou Art the Man by Mary Elizabeth Braddon. Chapter 26. Home Questions. Coralie sat late over her private diary. The clocks had struck 1 before she closed the book, and put it away in the box where she kept her money and her few trinkets under lock and key. She slept little that night, and the sleep she had was disturbed by troubled dreams. That interview between her father and her uncle had left a sense of bitter degradation in her mind. She had never really loved her father. There had been nothing between them but the bond of relationship, a bond which he had shown himself very glad to loosen. Yet he was her father, a part of her existence, the only being upon whom she had any strong claim, and it tortured her to think of the degradation that reflected upon herself. To be the daughter of such a father, there was the sting. To hear him ask for money, and to hear him so heartlessly refused by his one and only brother. Little as she liked Penrith, there had been that in his tone which told her that he had some justification for his brutality, and she was to go on living under the roof of this man, she, Hubert Urquhart's daughter, or to go back to the dreary existence from which Lady Penrith had rescued her. If only Coverdale had cared for me! She sighed again and again, in her restless turnings and tossings, while the inexorable clock ticked and the night lamp flickered. And then she thought, as many a woman thinks when the future lies dark before her, lit by not one gleam of hope, thought of what her life might have been if this man had chosen her for his wife. It was all very well to write of him scoffingly as a prim pattern of the uninteresting virtues. In her heart of hearts, she revered him for those qualities at which she scoffed. The gulf that lay between them was bridged over by her growing interest in his personality. She had begun by thinking of him only as a good match, heir to title and fortune, a man with a word who could change the whole tenor of her existence. She knew now by the blank his absence made in that house, by her jealous despair at his too evident regard for Lady Penrith, a regard of which he himself may be hardly conscious. She knew now that she loved him, and that if he had been an impecunious curate, she would have been content to share his life and let fortune go. But who would marry Herbert Urquhart's daughter? She asked herself. Even if I were ever so handsome, there would be that against me, and a plain daughter. I must have been mad to ever hope. She was in the breakfast room early, neat and fresh looking in her smart tailored gown, and with no indication, save a heavy look in her eyelids, of her miserable night. Her uncle had gone out before breakfast. Lady Penrith talked a little more than she had done at dinner on the previous evening, but was evidently anxious and expectant. A telegram was brought to her in the middle of breakfast, and Coralie could see that her aunt's hand trembled as she tore open the envelope. "Let the messenger wait," her ladyship told the servant after she had read the message twice over with profound attention. "No bad news, I hope, my dear," said Lady Selina. "Oh, no. A telegram nowadays does not imply bad news." "Of course not. But in this remote place you can't have many trivial telegrams, invitations, acceptances, excuses, the sort of thing one gets in London." "No, not that kind of thing," Lady Penrith answered absently as she put the message in her pocket. On her aunt asking her if she was going for a drive in the morning or afternoon, Lady Penrith answered no. She had a good many letters to write, and was not going out all day. "You and Cora can have the barouche or the pony cart, whichever you would prefer," she added. "Thank you, neither. I have not quite gotten over my influenza cold, and the only inducement to drive would have been your company." Complimentary to me, after my patient endurance of the old creature, thought Coralie, and then she said in her clear young voice, "In that case I shall go for a long walk directly after breakfast. You won't be angry with me if I should be late for luncheon, will you, aunt?" "Your aunt has been so irregular herself lately that she can hardly find fault with you for unpunctuality," Lady Selina remarked somewhat snappishly. Any deviation from the clockwork round of daily life was an offence to this lady. "Angry, Cora? Certainly not," said Lady Penrith. "But on what tremendous pilgrimage are you going? It is not 10, and you think you won't be home at 2. "Oh, I'm going for a long tramp towards the sea. I am longing for the wind off the sea." "You can get that in this garden. Too much of it for the poor flowers." "Ah, but not like the wind one gets on the very edge of the sea, along Allen Bay, or at St. Jude's, for example." Lady Penrith gave a little start at the mention of St. Jude's, a movement which did not escape Coralie. "I may go as far as Ardliston," she continued. "It is just the grey, breezy morning I adore." "Do as you like, Cora, only don't fatigue yourself," Lady Penrith said carelessly as she left the room. "Now, if I were a pretty girl," mused Cora, "she would hardly let me ramble for 3 or 4 hours alone. There would be suspicions of a lover. I might be going to meet someone. But in my case there can be no such danger. An ugly woman is what Caesar's wife ought to have been, above suspicion." Miss Urquhart had told the truth for once, in the way, albeit she was a young person who preferred falsehood. She was going to Ardliston in quest of her father. After that conversation of yesterday evening, she felt that she must see him, must question him, at any hazard of hard words. She could no longer exist in this cloud of ignorance. She stopped on the crest of a wind-blown ridge, hugged her neat little cloth jacket tighter round her, and looked back at the grey towers of Killander Castle. What a noble old place it was, originally a rude border fortress, enlarged and improved by successive generations. Sybil Higginson's money had set the final touches on the picture. Whatever was wanting of convenience or dignity had been supplied within the last 10 years. The gardens and the terraces had been extended. A spacious palm house had been built in the one angle where it would not be a blot upon the rugged grandeur of the exterior, and within doors there had been improvements in every detail. Money had been spent like water. And She's not even a tenant for life, mused Coralie. If my uncle were to die tomorrow, she would be houseless, so far as yonder the great pile is concerned, or the house in Berkeley Square. Hard lines to spend one's money upon somebody else's property. But then she can't afford to waste a few thousands, and she has Ellerslie House standing ready to receive her if she were to leave the castle. Ellerslie House. What a difference between the spick and span modern house built by a self-made millionaire and that grey fortress over there, which seems to still echo with the tramp of armed feet and the blare of trumpets. Coralie turned her back upon the grey towers. After that contemplative pause, and tramped steadily on, with her face to the sea. It was a long walk from the castle to Ardliston, but Miss Urquhart was a good walker, well broken in by the weary promenades of Madame Michon's pupils in the Bois, or along the chalky roads in the white suburbs that skirt the Bois, and later by lonely wanderings in West End London, rambles which were her sole respite from the dullness of the lodging house at the back of Piccadilly. She met only one shepherd boy between the castle and the beginning of the long, straggling street of Ardliston, and Ardliston itself might have been asleep for any signs of life or movement, except at the schools, where she heard the sing-song voices of the children chanting the multiplication table, a sound that told her that it was not yet noon, and saved her the trouble of looking at her watch. Her father might have gone back to London by the night mail, or by an early morning train, she thought, in which case she would be much disappointed. She wanted to see him, wanted to question him about the past, though she knew not how she would venture to shape her questions. But she had helped him, had watched for him. She had sacrificed her own instincts of loyalty and honour at his bidding, and she had a right to his confidence. I will do no more for him unless he trusts me fully, she said to herself. No, he had not left the Higginsons' arms. The landlady, who was busy in the little bar on the one side of the entrance, recognised Coralie. "Come to see your pa, miss?" "He's very late this morning. You'll find him at breakfast." She came out of her snug little nest among the bottles and glasses, and ushered Coralie into a sitting-room, where she found her father reading a newspaper at the breakfast table. He rose, startled at seeing her. "Oh, what brings you here so early? Anything new?" "No, nothing very important. 10 minutes to 12. Do you call that early?" "Early enough for a man who is such a beastly bad sleeper that he seldom gets a wink of sleep until daylight. Sit down, Cora. Do you like some tea? It was made a few minutes ago." He poured out a cup and handed it to her, with some show of attentiveness, while she sat looking at him dumbly, full of thought. He looked haggard and careworn, older than his elder brother, and it seemed to her that all the indications of a debased character were stamped upon his countenance: the furtive eye, the tightened lips, the curious twitch of the nostril now and then before he began to speak. "Well," he asked, when he had mixed a brandy and soda for himself, "what's your news?" She told him briefly how Mr. Coverdale had left the castle with Lady Penrith yesterday morning, and had not returned with her in the afternoon. "What kind of man is this Coverdale?" "A good man." "Good? Don't quite follow your meaning." That seemed likely enough, Coralie thought. "Conscientious and God-fearing. He is devoted to Lady Penrith, but even for her sake he would do nothing that was not strictly honourable." "So you think he has gone upon some kind of mission for her?" "I think so. She had a telegram this morning at breakfast, a long message, which I fancy may have been from him." "What's the use of fancies?" "Might have been from her dressmaker. Had you the sense to find out where it came from?" "No, I was not near enough to see it. I could only see that she was agitated at receiving it." "Huh! That tells me nothing. Well, keep your eyes open, Cora, and let no detail of her daily life escape your observation. Straws show which way the wind blows. Try to find out where the parson has gone. Are you going to stay here much longer?" "That depends on circumstances. I have no particular inducement to go anywhere else just now. I may go farther north, perhaps for a little shooting, but I have made no plans yet." There was a silence of some minutes. Urquhart took up the newspaper and read, or pretended to read. Cora felt it was easier to begin upon a painful subject now that his face was hidden. "Father, I was crossing the hall from the drawing-room to the billiard-room yesterday afternoon when you and my uncle were talking, and I could not help hearing a good deal." "You mean you couldn't help listening. Your curiosity got the better of your good breeding," retorted Urquhart, throwing down the paper and turning to his daughter with an angry scowl. "And you heard all that passed between my affectionate brother and me? Well, who cares?" "I care very much. I have been broken-hearted ever since." "You need not waste your emotions on me. I have a pretty tough hide. It is toughened in a long experience of hard knocks." "Father, what odious things he said of you! And you did not deny them." "Why should I trouble myself? He is not judge or jury. I wanted help, and he did not want to help me. The easiest way of refusing was to be abusive. You are woman of the world enough to comprehend that, I hope, Cora." "No, I am not. I can't comprehend that you should let him say such things." "If I had knocked him down, there would have been a scene and a scandal. You would have found yourself homeless. I know of no other way of dealing with him." "But that you should ask him for money, importune him, swallow all his insults. Father, what degradation there is in that." "Degradation, yes, perhaps. And you wonder that I should put myself in the way of being insulted. You wonder that I should beg of my brother, who married the heiress I was trying to marry, the woman who cared not one straw for either of us. You wonder that I should ask him to open his wife's coffers for me. You are a fool, Cora. A man hemmed round with debt, distracted for want of money as I am, isn't likely to be scrupulous as to the mode or manner of getting it. Don't whine about what you heard yesterday. You may think yourself lucky if I don't turn forger or highwayman, sign her ladyship's name to a stolen cheque, or hold up a train carrying bullion. What might a man not do at his wits' end, as I am? And my elder brother has the command of 80,000 a year, for his wife denies him nothing, and won't give me 800 or 80 or £8. That's what brotherly love means nowadays, Cora. Very much like the ointment upon Aaron's head, ain't it? Why does he hate you? What did you do to offend him? Nothing. We both courted the same woman. He won her by a fluke. Unintentionally, by sheer ill luck. I helped him to win her. He ought to be grateful to me, but he ain't. He finds it cheaper to ride the high horse and blackguard me. But there must have been something, father, on your part, some cruel wrong, some act of treachery that gives my uncle and his wife the right to hold themselves aloof from you. She chooses to fancy herself wronged, and he takes advantage of the position. Come, Cora, I'm not going to be questioned about my past life by my own daughter. And I am not going to act as your spy any more, unless you give me your confidence, Cora answered resolutely, looking her father full in the face. There was no filial love in that look. If she felt his degradation strongly, it was because the degradation was reflected upon her. To be the daughter of such a man, to live on sufferance in a house whose threshold he was not allowed to cross, that was the sting. It was her own pride that was hurt. She had borne the brunt of poverty, and suffered from shabby frocks and school bills in arrear, but never till yesterday evening had her father's fallen state been brought home to her. Spy. That's a most unpleasant word, Cora, and you seem to repeat it with gusto, simply because it is unpleasant. I asked you to keep your ears and eyes open in Penrith's house. In her ladyship's interest, because of your friendship for her. That was the fable you imposed upon me. Fable? And imposed? He shrugged his shoulders with a light scornfulness, as if such words hurt him very little, even from a daughter's lips. And then he rose and walked to the window. But I am to be hoodwinked no longer, pursued Cora impetuously. I know now that you hate her. Do I? Asked Mr. Urquhart, drumming on the pane, with his back turned upon his daughter. If I do, it's only the hate that every strong-natured man feels for the woman he loved in vain. She had but to marry me, and I would have been the most docile and devoted of husbands, her head servant out of livery. But, you see, she preferred my brother, and so I can't expect to go on loving her for ever. He has treated me like a pariah dog, and she has treated me no better, which is short-sighted on her part, for she should at least remember that I am heir presumptive, and that if anything should happen to me and to Penrith, all of her grandeurs would pass to me. It doesn't matter to him, for his rights and interests in this life must be over and done with before mine could begin. But it would matter to her to the extent of 2 fine houses and a large domain, and all the money she has sunk upon them. Must they go with the title? Both houses? asked Cora, her indignation lapsing suddenly into interest. The castle and Penrith House, Mayfair, both go with the title. He was born in one, the heir, at the castle, and, of course, an occasion for bonfires on all the hills, and roasted oxen, and kilderkins of strong beer, for which my father could very ill afford. I was born in the other, and I doubt if the household had so much as an extra bottle of wine to celebrate my nativity. Yes, the house in London must go, whenever Penrith goes, and all her ladyship has spent upon it, something like £30,000, I believe, will go to the heir, whoever he might be. Heir presumptive has a grand look against your name in the peerage, said Cora, waxing bitter again. But I don't think you have much chance of outliving my uncle. Bar accidents, none. But the bursting of a gun, the running down of a yacht, a smash on the railway, a fall from his horse, anything of that sort would be as big a fluke for me as his marriage was for him. But I don't expect it. Drumming louder with fingertips whose sharp touch denoted nervous irritability. Expect it, did I say? I know it will never happen. I'm one of those men who come into the world with bad luck branded on their foreheads. There's no such thing as bad luck, Father. It's the idlest nonsense to talk in that strain. You inherited a younger brother's portion, and you squandered it. You married foolishly, before you were of age, offended your father, spoilt your chance of a fortune with a wife. You lived recklessly. You loaded your shoulders with debt. You have never struggled or worked as other men of good race and small means have done. You should have gone to the bar, or into politics, or to the colonies. There must have been some career open to you, something better than the miserable life you are leading. A beggar to the brother who hates you. A beggar. And refused with contumely. She brushed away her tears, so rare, in those cold grey eyes, tears of shame and mortification. Have you nothing more to say? Sneered her father. This moral lecture might be continued ad infinitum. The daughter's rebuke of the reprobate father. A very pretty subject, and offering fine scope for the prosy and the trite. Well, I will say no more. I know that all lamentations over the irrevocable are worse than useless. Let the past be the past. Only, if you want my help in the future, you must let me into your secrets. Why are you keeping this watch upon your brother's wife? Why? For my own satisfaction. She is my enemy, and would injure me if she could. But how can she injure you? What could she do? Never mind that, Cora. Knowledge is power, and it suits me to be informed of all that happens at the castle. Trust me, then. Be frank, if you can. What was your quarrel with Lady Penrith? Why does she hate you? Pooh. It was a silly girl's hatred to begin with. She was madly in love with her cousin, who murdered Sir Joseph's adopted daughter in a fit of epileptic rage. Is it certain that he was the murderer? Certain, yes. He was found almost in the act of murder, his hands and clothes stained with her blood. There is no room for doubt. Miss Higginson visited him in the lock-up yonder, a wretched hole that was done away with soon after. I found her there and helped in his escape, was indeed the chief means of getting him away, and when the boat, on board which I put him, was wrecked in a gale that was only beginning when the boat started, she laid his death at my door. But that was the only cause of her dislike? Penrith accused you of trying to win her by the basest means, trading on her ignorance of life. Rot. People in the neighbourhood looked coldly at her after that escapade at the lock-up. Her conduct was too unconventional to escape slander. I may have somewhat magnified the village scandal when I urged her to marry me, but I wanted her to feel the need of a husband to defend her good name. A shabby trick, and it failed. Yes, it failed. The turtle dove. For Brandon Mountfort, she had been a very dove. Turned upon me like a tigress, she flung herself into my brother's arms, partly from sheer malignity to me, and partly because she knew that whatever scandal there had been would be best covered by a coronet. Well, it was a shabby business. However, I'm glad I know the past, but I can't understand the situation in the present. Why should you fear her? Why should you watch her? That's my affair. I shan't answer any more questions. He turned and faced her again, frowningly. I won't trouble you any more, except to ask you how long you are going to stay here. I don't know. Perhaps for a few days. Perhaps only a few hours. Look here, Cora. If anything out of the common should happen at the castle, you had better come here, as you have done this morning, on the chance of finding me. On reflection, I am inclined to wait till the parson's return from his mysterious mission. You think his mission may have something to do with you? I don't say that. But I should like to know the meaning of it. I rely on your shrewdness for that. Come, Cora. There's no use in riding your high horse. Remember that your interests are interwoven with mine. Anything that hurts me must hurt you. Yes, I know that, she answered with a sigh. Your disgrace is my disgrace. It wraps me round like a dark cloud. I live and move in it. This was no idle complaint on her part. The burden of her father's evil reputation had seemed to her a much heavier load since she had known John Coverdale, who, without self-assertion of any kind, had impressed her with the idea of what an honourable man's life and mind ought to be, how fair a record the one, how high a standard the other, and in that pure atmosphere of noble thought and lofty aspiration, how foul and grim her father's character looked. End of chapter 26.